Hello, this is Public Advocate, and I'm Shirley Graves. I have our two political commentators here who've been on our program many times discussing what was going on in the elections and things like that. We have over here we have Greg Brockband, who is a senior member of the and media past chairman of the Marin Democratic Party, and he's on the board of the Marin Bar Association. And on this side we have Jack Wilkinson, who's chairman of the Nevada Republican Central Committee, and Marin Republican Central Committee. Oh, right. And past president of the Marin Association of Realtors.
Wait a minute, I just realized. I'm on your right, he's on your left. There's a problem there. Well, that's all right. It's always been, we always do it that way.
I asked Nick that way, and he said no. The way it's going to show up is the opposite.
Oh, good. So we are on the correct side.
Okay.
Yeah, I checked with Nick.
I didn't think about that. Okay, thank you.
Well, that's okay. All right, I guess so. So we are going to be talking about the recent elections and the elections that are coming up in March, and just the things that are going on in the political situation.
I hear there's a presidential race.
Yes, and the presidential race that's going to be
Jack and I have no opinions about it.
Eventually. So, gentlemen, who wants to start arguing about the political situation?
Let me give, as quick as I can, a minute or two, I hope, report on the recent elections and why they were so small and almost went unnoticed. First of all, more than half the county didn't vote on them because they didn't have an election. For decades, until the last year or two, most of our local nonpartisan elections were held in odd-numbered years. Passed a new law a few years ago saying that if your difference between your voter turnout in even-numbered years, like presidential years, when ours is really high, like 90%, and odd-numbered years, if you're having your local elections in those years, like us, and it's more like 40 or 50%, that's too big a difference. You've got to move all your odd-numbered year local elections to even-numbered years, and that's why we
say this.
State law.
Oh, okay.
Try to improve turnout. And well, yes, we'll have a higher turnout, but I'm not sure people will know what they're voting on. And now all the local elections are going to be competing with the partisan elections for volunteers and for donations, and most importantly for the voters' attention, I think, is the one that will really suffer and is the most important. I mean, they're having enough trouble getting enough information already, according to every study, and now you've got to add all the local ones and the partisan ones in the same elections in the same year, every year, even-numbered years. It's a shame. Some of us did not support this move, but it's happened for the foreseeable future. No more regularly scheduled, odd-numbered year local elections. The last ones we had were last month, November, and it was only in 3 cities, city councils, 3 in Novato and 1 in San Anselmo and 1 in Fairfax. So we did have several city council elections, but that's a fraction of what we used to have. We used to have all the school districts and the special districts, and there's about 50 publicly elected boards, maybe 60 when you add publicly elected offices. So that's 260 elected officials, and there are only a few up last fall, and that was the last few. But anyway, you'd think that all being pushed to even-numbered years, so that's next March and next November. Next March, we will talk about shortly, in fact, is not as big as you'd think, because there's always been a few races, and they stay there, like the county supervisor, and this time a few new city councils and a couple sanitary districts. That's it. 90% of them have been moved to November, so November is going to be the big one. Last month, though, we had Councilman Eric Lucan reelected in Novato, along with 2 new council members in the first ever district city council elections in Marin history. Novato did it last month. Santa Fe will do it next year. And in the 2 new districts, the 2 new council members are Susan Wernick in one and Amy Peel in the other. Those are the results of the Novato elections. San Anselmo saw Ford Green reelected, but the top vote getter was Steve Burdo, who was running for the 3rd time. Great guy, very experienced, was endorsed by everybody he saw. I've never seen that before, every group. And Fairfax, we saw incumbent Renee Goddard reelected. And the upset there, perhaps, was that the other favored candidate, been on the Planning Commission for 7 years, ran 2 years ago, got the 2 big endorsements early in the process, Cindy Swift, and started out election night ahead, lost to Stephanie Hellman, who caught up with her over the course of the few weeks after the election, and now will be the new council member for Fairfax.
I think the more interesting question is, why do we have so few people interested? That, to me, is far more interesting than what they did with the scheduling of the elections. I remember when I started voting many years ago, it seemed to me we were voting every year, and there were people always running for offices, at least in San Francisco. I was a little concerned about it changing to this every even year, and the main reason being is the ballot is so long that people get tired of reading it.
Yeah.
So maybe the turnout may be higher only because there's a presidential election. That drives a lot of voters. Other places, if we don't have people running, we don't have anything to argue about, people lose interest.
I agree.
So what did we have this last time that got anything excited?
Well, there's always one or two or maybe three city councils that avoid having an election because they don't have more candidates running than there are seats, so they're not on the ballot, which is a shame. You and I agree completely. It's bad for democracy and bad for those candidates and bad for the citizens. But the real interesting statistic I found, exactly what you said, is that usually I would say about 2/3 of incumbents run for re-election. Last month, there were 9 city council members up for re-election. 6 of them stepped down. 3 ran for re-election. 6, that's 2/3.
In which town?
Stepped down. 2 in Novato, 1 in Fairfax, 1 in San Anselmo, and the one I didn't mention, but we talked about it just before the camera started rolling, is 2 in Larkspur. 2 incumbents stepped down, and they're replaced by 2 new people, but that was it, 2, so there's no
I
election.
thought their term expired.
Their terms expired. The incumbents stepped down, but 2 new candidates filed to replace them, and they're going to walk onto the city council this month without ever having an election.
But the question is why? Are people so satisfied with what is going on that they see no need to get involved in an election?
The incumbents will say that. I think apathy gets worse and worse. I think fewer and fewer people are willing to step up. And I think it's a very discouraging sign if more and more incumbents are stepping down. I mean, it varies with the office. Maybe that's becoming standard, 1 or 2 terms and you're out. Although there's a few that go 3 or 4 terms. But in the school boards, they're stepping down at a higher and higher rate. I noticed that a year or 2 ago. And the special districts, usually those people stay on for 20, 30 years. There's hardly any turnover, any challengers. But I'm not sure they're going to stay around as long if I'm reading this.
So I think the issue really is, why are people not participating in self-government?
That is the important issue.
Yeah, that's far more important than...
You mean more people running for the
Running for
office?
office.
Why are not people stepping up and saying, I want to do this? I think part of it is because they don't feel they can affect any change. So many things have gone from local politics to state level and federal level of controlling things. Like schools have an awful lot of federal regulation now, which state and local people can't change. So you're Sisyphus. You may have this idea, push it up the rock, up the hill, and then the federal government or the state government says, oh no, we don't allow that because of this regulation or that.
Don't they have to pay money to file to run for something?
No, you're missing the issue. The issue is the state regulations overrule, and the state and federal regulations overrule what the local school board people might want to change.
I agree with you that that's
no,
happening.
I understand that. I just meant to run for an office. Is there a charge to file your name to run for an office?
If there is, it's nominal.
Some get 20 signatures, some have a nominal fee. The most expensive thing in the filing is the $400, $500, $600 it takes to pay for a ballot statement.
Yeah.
But it's not the cost of the filing, it's the cost of mounting a campaign, which may discourage people. $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for most small city councils. For Santa Fe and Novato, it's more like 40 or 50 or 60. Used to be. Should be less now because it's district, but it's still 20 or 30.
Well, I know when I ran for the trustees,
College Marin.
that was $50,000 was the, well, I didn't have $50,000.
Well, I never raised that.
But that's what my campaign manager said, if you really want to win it. I can't remember her name that did win the seat. I came in 5th out of 6th there. She spent almost $50,000 on her campaign, and she ran a hell of a campaign. You can't dispute it. She had robocalls running for, I think, about a week before the election.
Wow. Used to be we'd get 100 endorsements, put an ad in the IJ, and that was enough, a few $1,000s. Some of them I know in the last 5 or 10 years have started sending out mailers to everybody in the county. That's expensive. That's why you need $10,000, $20,000, $30,000.
However, the issue still remains. Money can be raised if you really want to run for the office. Why don't people want to run for the office? And I believe that there's too much exterior, upper-level interference with local elections.
And that discourages people from running, you think? I never thought of that. You may be right.
Craig, when you ran, that was years ago when you had far more control. Now it turns out if you run for the school board, you're subject to state regulations that change or limit the impact you can have on the curriculum. Why do you run for the school board? To have an impact on how the school is run.
I would love to see a study on that very topic because it may be a threat to democracy. I was not aware that power was migrating from the local level to the state or national level as much as you're saying it is, nor that it had an impact on the number of candidates which are willing to run because they can't have an impact because things
Well,
are...
I'm asking the question, Greg, and because I've watched over the years these things take place from the state, but the federal government has come down. What was the last one that came down?
Court decisions often hamstring local officials.
But that's the point. If you can't have any impact on what you run for, why run for it? The last place that I see any ability to have an impact is city councils. And I look around at the cities, and the city I'm most familiar with, San Rafael, I don't really see a lot of problems. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure that could be fixed, but there's nothing major. It's kind of irritating, but it's not debilitating. And I don't think people run to solve irritations. They run to solve things that are debilitating.
That's a good point. Now, issues like homelessness have been near the top of the list for some years, and affordable housing generally. There are issues like we heard about at a lunch today on pension. We have too much unfunded liability. I think most of us would agree that we do have too much unfunded liability. They start paying it down and faster.
I brought that up 2 years ago, right here at this very table. Over $1 trillion the state has in liabilities. Nobody was paying any attention. They're only paying a little bit of attention that these two gentlemen brought this up today in an explosive study. And I must say it's explosive. I looked at it briefly online before we came. It's legible. You and I can read it. Accountants before, the only people that could read and understand that were accountants. And everything was hidden. You had to go through, as John said, you got to go through a pile of books to find anything.
John McCauley, Mill Valley Council member, who along with longtime Larkspur City Council member Larry Chu are both experts on this, both very good. John gave an incredible presentation today. I've heard him before speak once or twice on this topic. He is very, very good, and every city should be doing what he has Mill Valley doing. Long-term plans, more pay down, and terminating defined benefit pensions and replacing them with, well, you can't eliminate them and just make them disappear, but stop funding them, instead fund them with 401ks, defined contribution. That seems to be the trend where everybody's moving to in private industry, and I suspect in public unions too, but it'll be over the kicking and screaming of unions.
Well, therein lies the problem. Let's go back many, many years, and I'm talking going back, I'm going to San Francisco, when the union workers started getting hefty, hefty raises. And somebody said, well, why are you giving them so much money? The fact of the matter is they were supporting the people running for office. So we're going to negotiate. I'm a city supervisor. You're going to negotiate with me, and you simply say, look, if you want us to contribute to your campaign, you better give us this increase.
Not quite that blunt, but almost. I agree it's a problem, and the perception is horrible, especially when the city manager or the county administrator is doing the negotiating with the unions, but he benefits by anything that they agree to with the unions. That just looks
that's the problem. That's one other problem. But there was a bit of extortion, and it's happened here, and it's happened in almost every city in the state and probably the rest of the nation. It's just that I've seen it here in this state. And of course, it's how do you negotiate with yourself?
This sounds like a little over bureaucratic, but it's the best example I can think of. City of,
it is.
I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way to do it so that you don't have that conflict of interest. In Santa Fe, as you probably know, every year, and every third or fifth year, it's a more extensive process, but the city of Santa Fe hires a consultant, HFC consultant, maybe a new one now, to approve and recommend a rate increase for the sanitary district. We're in sanitary district, so the city doesn't negotiate directly with the sanitary district. They hire this consultant who's independent, neutral, and they say, and the sanitary district says, well, we want to make the following improvements, and therefore we want a 9% increase. And they study it and say, no, that's too high. We don't agree with that. We don't agree with that. We don't agree with that. How about 6%? And you get this and this and this. And they take that to the cities. But we're not dealing with the sanitary district. We're dealing with the consultant. Maybe we need some kind of independent consultant to evaluate what the budget of that city is, what the trends are, recommend to the council what they should do after the council has said what their parameters are, and then they go negotiate with unions without the council members or the city managers or the county administrators taking part in those negotiations.
Well, that's probably a good idea, and it's a way to solve the issue of recompense and extortion, which is really what it is. It puts it on a different level. While you were saying all that, I come across the fact that long-term planning. Now, I've been in real estate for a long time now, and I've sold a lot of investment real estate. And one of the things that I find, especially smaller investors, they don't set aside what we call reserves for replacements, a sinking fund. You know this stuff is going to happen. You know it's going to break. One of the things that John brought up today, every 6 years we're going to have a recession. We should be planning for it. We don't know it'll be 6 years. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 4.
But on average, for the last 50 years,
you got to plan for it. And nobody's been planning for it. And when he said that, I thought, yeah, most of these property owners don't plan. Something goes wrong. Now they got to write a big check and find the money to fix something that has to be fixed. Well, that's what is happening to us. And the defined benefit plans, they were a great idea at a time when it was affordable for companies. And we weren't in the situation we're in now. But the worst is the health plan. And the health plan has been going around and around for years. And the biggest problem I see, this is from a personal standpoint, is that you and I are no longer responsible for our health care. The insurance company takes care of it. So whatever they charge the insurance company, and the only time we're even aware of it is if somebody says, oh, they don't pay this much, but we have to charge, and we get a bill. The rest of the time we don't know. When I was a kid, you went to the doctor, you knew what it was going to cost you.
did you pay it out of your pocket?
You had to pay it out of your pocket. You were aware of what the costs were, and you paid attention to it. An awful lot of people, they don't pay attention. They don't have to because the insurance company pays it. The insurance company can now start raising prices, whatever they want.
I bet you and I would agree on most of the reasons why our current healthcare system is dysfunctional. I suspect we have opposite answers as to how to fix it. I would, of course, advocate for a single-payer system, and you would say, no, that'd be a terrible
Absolutely not, because then the single payer becomes who? It becomes the government. Who doesn't? But so far, the government has failed at every one of a single-payer system it has.
They've never had one. Every other country in the world
talking about every bureaucracy that this country has. I look at all these bureaucracies.
Police, fire, public education. You think they failed at all those?
Yes. An awful lot of places they failed at all those. The fire, but you see...
You advocate private funding for fire protection? You know,
no.
That house is not insured. We're not going to put that fire out.
The whole idea behind this republic, Greg, is that the government should do for people those things they cannot do for themselves.
Like fire protection.
Fire and police
protection.
Those are different things.
And public education. Some people believe in private education. I want that as an option. But there should be a public education for everyone because a lot of people can't afford it.
But we have to keep an eye on where the money is going. And if you look at what is going in the teachers union and all the money that's coming out, John brought it up today, the cost per pupil, well, it's very high. But we're still 47 and 48 in educational achievement throughout this country. California is at the bottom of this list.
I think the 47, 48 was per pupil funding.
No.
But he pointed out that
what he was talking about was funding. I'm talking about school achievement. I'm talking about performance. We pay tremendous amounts of money to teachers. Now, I've been a teacher. I like to get paid. I think teachers, I kind of have a certain reverence for teachers. But we have too many teachers that shouldn't be teaching. And they're getting paid too much money. So there's no way we're not looking over what is doing what in the system. This is what concerns me.
It may be we need to restructure teacher tenure.
Well, maybe we should.
And make it a little easier to get rid of bad teachers because their argument is that teachers can be politically persecuted by a vindictive principal that doesn't agree with them politically and fire them for their political views. I suspect that's very rare. So I think that fear is overplayed. So I think you could probably loosen up the right to fire bad teachers with enough due process and review and peer review so you're not firing somebody willy-nilly for no good reason, but often there are good reasons, and often you need to be able to fire them, and right now it's too hard.
Well, that's one of the problems with most civil service, is that you have to...
Particularly teachers.
Now, we were going to be talking about the recent election, and I know you solved a lot of the world's problems here, but have we got anything more to say about the recent election? Because we've got another election coming up in March.
We do digress from local elections sometimes, but that's what I love, this political philosophy talk. I think we've covered, as I figured, briefly, the last elections, last month, the last few city council elections, the last regularly scheduled nonpartisan elections in Marin in odd-numbered years. Moving on to the next election, March 3rd, we actually are in the middle of we're towards the end of the filing period. We are here on we're on December 4th, and Friday, the 6th, is the close of filing. So right now things are in flux. A lot of people doing last-minute filing, but here's the synopsis, and I want your opinions. The three big races in March, as always, are the three county supervisor races. It looked until a couple days ago that none of them were going to be contested. Two of the incumbents are running for re-election, Katie Rice and Dennis Rodoni. And one of them is stepping down, Kate Sears, but the candidate to replace her is such an overwhelming favorite that she might as well be an incumbent, Stephanie Moulton Peters, longtime Mill Valley councilwoman. So we had 3 virtually incumbents not challenged. That is bad for democracy. I agree. There should be challengers. Well, in the last couple of days, a couple have come out of the woodwork. Bill Bailey is challenging Stephanie Moulton Peters in Southern Marin, and Alex Easton Brown, who's run for a few things before in the last decade or two, is running against Dennis Rodoni.
So when did you get these names?
Today and today. Just brand new. They're not posted on the website yet. They're not posted anywhere. And now, when they take out papers, doesn't mean they're going to file, but most of the time they do. And he has run before, and called a lot before. And if he hasn't,
So he hasn't turned them in yet.
Hasn't turned them in yet. He's got till Friday. He's got to get 20 signatures and probably pay a $600 fee to get his name on the ballot statement. But usually that's not a problem if you have a serious campaign. It may not be a serious campaign because he has not gotten many votes in his past runs for office, and he's starting really late.
And he's running against Dennis Rodoni
Yes.
in 4th District.
Yes. Those are the supervisor races. There may be more.
And then the other 2 people are running unopposed.
Well, Katie Rice is unopposed so far. Nobody's taken out papers to file against her in Ross Valley District. Stephanie Moulton Peters, who's not an incumbent, but she's an overwhelming front runner, is now being challenged by Bill Bailey, it looks like. So it looks like there will be 2 candidates. But from what I hear, he doesn't have much money, and he doesn't have any name recognition, so I think he's going to have a hard time.
And that's the Mill Valley.
Now the question becomes, what are the issues going to be?
Southern Marin. That's a good question.
What issues do we have for our supervisors? I'll tell you, I've only got a couple. And the biggest one I have is, their failure on Golden Gate Village. You know, the supervisors are responsible for that, and they've ignored that, and it's deteriorated even further. And I've been speaking before the supervisors, please take care of this, because too many people down there are suffering.
Good for you. I agree with
The
you.
other one.
A lot of liberals are supporting the kind of change supported by Royce McLemore and the Golden Gate Village Residents Council. Did you go to that Marin Coalition meeting about 6 months ago where they had speakers? And
yes.
I learned a lot, like Marin Housing Authority only gets so much money. So they have like a few $100,000 and it takes a few million to repair it. And rats live in ivy everywhere. You've got to do a massive, still it shouldn't take that many thousands, or much less tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands to eradicate all the ivy within a block or 2 or 3. I don't know.
Well, there's all kinds of little things that could be done. It seems to me that there's more confusion about where to start than there is. I don't know that there's not a will to do it. There just doesn't seem to be any force to start doing it. And that's one of my big concerns. The other one is this rent control. They call it something else. But the fact of the matter is, it's statewide, now has a statewide rent control law. I find this onerous. It is asking one segment of the population to support the other.
I have some concerns too. Why do you think it's a supervisor issue if now it's a state law? It was local issue this year, but now...
It was a supervisor issue before it became a state law.
Right.
And they called it eviction control.
Just cause eviction?
Yeah, and you know, as a landlord, I don't get rid of anybody that's paying rent unless they are creating problems or not paying rent.
I have a particular perspective as a landlord-tenant attorney for over 30 years, and this changes dramatically the relationship between a landlord and a tenant. Up until now, a landlord can give a tenant a notice, whatever they want. The state was not involved until they file an unlawful detainer complaint. They just file that with a court. The court doesn't necessarily do anything. There's a settlement conference. They settle, they work it out. Now suddenly they have to give them a different kind of notice, and it has to be filed with the county. Government is involved, and you're giving a landlord giving a notice to a tenant. It has to be for a good reason. Now, usually it's non-payment of rent. Of course, that's a good reason. And other violations of the leases or behavior constituting a nuisance. Do you think that will have a few fights about whether or not there's behavior? What you're doing is giving tenants more defenses and creating a full employment act for lawyers like me that represent, landlords and tenants. But whether that's a good thing, I admit that the bureaucracy created around San Francisco's rent control ordinance for decades now, and Berkeley and Oakland and a few others, has meant that there is a cottage industry of attorneys which gouge landlords anytime they want a tenant to move out, even for a very good and legitimate reason. So now if you're a San Francisco tenant for a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, the landlord wants you to move out for a good reason, you're going to get a big payoff. That's never been true in Marin, and it shouldn't be true. But it is in San Francisco, and it may be coming to Marin and statewide because of the new state.
Well, statewide is where it's going to come from. I don't see it happening necessarily in Marin. With the new 1482, the state law, it just creates problem. It creates another problem. And that came up briefly at the lunch today, and it comes up all the time. You mentioned it earlier in this talk, homelessness. We don't have enough property. And an investor is not looking to get into a fight with the city the state or the county if he wants to build something. We've got two things going against it. One, we've got very restrictive zoning laws. You can only get so many units, and you have to build so many units that are, you know, market rate, and then you got to build some below market rate. At some point you say, well, wait a minute, if I put all this money in here, what am I going to get? How marginal is my return going to be for the risk I take?
That's always been my concern about rent control, is that it disincentivizes landlords to, well, developers to build and landlords to maintain, because I'm not going to get that much more money. I can only raise it a few percent a year. So I've always had some concerns, but I'll tell you why I'm sympathetic very briefly to tenants and to landlords. There are some landlords that have had their properties a long time, their property taxes are very low, they've been making a ton of money, and they make more money and more money and more money as rent doubles every few years, it seems like.
Which is why you hold on to real estate for a long time. Should you be penalized for holding on to it? But the way you're starting to talk right now is to penalize somebody who held it a long time.
I'm just saying that more and more tenants are feeling squeezed out as their 40, 50, 55, 60% of their income goes towards rent. Very rich landlords that are gouging their tenants for every penny they can. Now, I'm not saying that this is the right solution.
Well, wait a minute, gouging. I mean,
agree.
there
That's
are
just
some people that do gouge, but most people don't.
Now, I agree. Now, here's where I'm sympathetic to landlords. Most landlords may be very comfortable. They may be charging the maximum rental amount. You can't blame them for that. But some landlords, the ones I really have sympathy for, are mom and pop landlords that they've owned these properties for 10, 20, 30 years. They've worked hard all their lives. They've invested their life savings in this under the theory it's going to carry them for the rest of their life. You've suddenly just limited their rent increases and their future income, and they may be charging below market rent. And now with rent caps for the first time ever in California history, they can't bring it up to market rate. So they either have to spread it out over several years if they want to get up to market rate, or sell it to somebody that will wait several years to bring it up to market rate. So whenever a landlord is charging a tenant less than market rate, I wish everybody would understand this, landlords and tenants, that landlord is giving a gift to the tenant.
That's my point. I just started this with one segment of the population is being asked to support the rest. And that's not fair. If we're going to have this, let everybody chip in. But now just the landlord gets to do it.
We've digressed again, but because we talked about issues with county supervisors. It's a good
Well,
one.
these are issues, and the supervisors are the ones that take on this issue.
Let me give a brief mention of the other races besides the three supervisors.
Well, I was going to say we had several town council races.
They're
and we'd
new
be
on
interested
it.
in going
Right.
into what happened
Corte
there.
Madera has two incumbents up for re-election, Sloan Bailey and Jim Andrews. I've heard differing stories on both of them in recent days as to whether or not they're going to run for re-election. It's not sure. There are two new candidates have filed, however, Fred Casisa and Charles Lee. So maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe they know the incumbents aren't running again, or maybe they're willing to run against the incumbents. But Corte Madera has two new candidates and two questionable incumbents, whether or not they'll run. Now, Mill Valley has three incumbents, but two of them are running for something else. Stephanie Moulton Peters, after 3 terms, is running for county supervisor, so that'll be a vacant seat. Of the two remaining, Jim Wickham and Sashi McEntee, by the way, a liberal, Mill Valley, both Republicans. In fact, there's a third Republican, I think, on that council as well.
I've heard, but I haven't seen the name.
Yeah. Anyways, Jim Wickham, they also have a 2-year seat because there was a resignation a few months ago of Jessica Jackson Sloan. So there's a 2-year seat, and Jim Wickham, rather than run for a new 4-year seat, is running for the short 2-year seat. So that's his symbol of saying, okay, I'll do 2 more years, but that's it, then I'm done. So he's running for that, probably unopposed, I'd guess. But that leaves another open seat for the 4-year seats. Sashi McEntee is probably the only incumbent running for one of the 3 seats, the 4-year seats. There's a young man I know named Max Perret, who's only late 20s, I think, but he's been extremely active for 15 years since he was a teenager at Tam High, and he is running for one of the seats, but I don't know of any others. There may be others, but usually the city clerks are in charge of the local city elections, so the county won't know until often the close of filing. So that's Mill Valley. Tiburon has a 2-year seat available, and there are 2 candidates, I think, who have taken out papers, but it's a little premature. I can't get any information on it. Jack Ryan and Daniel Amir. One or the other or both may run. That's what the city clerk said a week or 2 ago, but they've taken out papers. Doesn't mean they'll run, but probably will. Finally, Ross Town Council. Pretty small. Not that many people know about it. Once again, 3 incumbents. Once again, 2 of them we're not sure whether they'll run again. Elizabeth Breckus and Peter Rupert Russell. Beach Kuehl, that's a nickname, Beach, has taken out papers, so he may be the only incumbent that runs for re-election.
So you've got Ken Freeman and Mary
Feynman and
Well,
Mary
if
McFadden.
if there's 3 running and the 3 seats are open, then they're all in.
No contest. But
Yeah.
who knows? There could be another one comes out of the woodwork before the deadline Friday. By the way, Friday's the first deadline. If all the incumbents run for re-election, That's the final deadline. In fact, if all the incumbents run for re-election,
They're not on the ballot.
then, well, if all the incumbents run for re-election and challengers, that's
Well,
closed
if there's
too.
a challenger, then.
But if one or more of the incumbents don't file for re-election by this Friday, then they hold it open for 5 more days, and the final close of filing will be next Wednesday, the 11th. And that may happen in some of these. But anyway, the last 2 are 2 sanitary districts that have traditionally been on in the even-numbered year primaries, a large one and a small one, Ross Valley and Almonte. One has 2 incumbents, one has 3 incumbents. 4 of the 5 incumbents have taken out papers to run for re-election. No sign of any new candidates or challengers. So it's a fairly short ballot, really. 3 county supervisors, may not be serious challengers. Some city council races that may be interesting, 3 or 4. And 2 sanitary districts, which don't look very interesting so far for lack of any new candidates or challengers.
Well, of course, in Nevada, we wouldn't be voting on the Ross or the Ross Valley elections at all. So we
None for Novato in
Yeah.
March. You just had the city council races, and then most everything is going to be in November next year.
Yeah.
There'll be sanitary district races and fire protection district races and school district races and city council races.
It's going to be a big ballot.
Yep. Not just Novato, but everywhere. So that'll take some time to wade through, and that's where it'll be hard for voters to absorb all that. In addition to, oh yes, there's a presidential race coming up. I always feel a little badly that I feel that the vast majority of voters, the vast majority of their attention focuses on the presidential race. At least they do that. That's better than nothing.
Well,
But
yeah.
you don't pay any attention to U.S. Senator, Congress, state legislature, county supervisors, city council members, school board members, special district members. Nope, don't know anything about any of those people, just the presidential race. We don't have a very well-informed electorate, in my opinion. They don't really study the issues. They don't go out. It's getting harder and harder. They don't look at their mailers. There's nothing on TV. They read the ballot statement, maybe. 200 words, very important.
Greg, there's a lot on TV. The problem is what's on TV is not about the election.
You could find on cable access TV, the League of Women Voters.
No, you missed my point.
Yeah,
There are too many distractions.
I agree.
People look, to listen, to sit, you and I are political junkies, so we'll sit and watch all this stuff. We'll listen. We'll parse words. What did they really mean by saying that?
You talking about like presidential candidates?
I'm talking about any candidate. You pay attention, I pay attention. Most people don't pay attention. They'd rather watch Leave It to Beaver or some other show, cops and robbers.
You're dating yourself there.
Jeopardy. I watch Jeopardy.
You shouldn't have brought it up. They're going to watch something that's entertainment. Entertainment is the center of what goes on in this nation. And it's so easy to say, oh man, these people are boring. I don't believe him. Oh, he's a liar. Yeah, I love what he has to say. I'm going to vote for him. You've made up your mind. There's no sense listening to anything else. I want to watch, whatever a TV show is.
Entertainment, I agree. For somebody who's involved with the media and involved with politics, you'd think I'd watch TV. I don't actually, just I don't have time and I'm not interested, and I get my political information in other ways, like newspapers talk about old-fashioned, and email increasingly, which
Newspapers, and look at the newspaper that we have in this town, which is now shrinking to almost nothing. We don't have any real reporters, people that are journalists. We don't have people that report news. We have opinion pieces, even with news headlines. They're not reporting facts. They're just reporting opinions.
And you're lucky if you get one short cursory article about each race. Maybe it's a really big hot race.
So now the answer becomes what, Greg? We don't have people running for office. We don't have people voting for office. We don't have people paying attention. We got a problem.
I think
we have a very serious
I agree
problem.
with you it's in decline. I don't think it's in decline as quite as rapidly as you're implying. And I think a lot of the burden falls on the existing council members or school board members or special district board members. When they're stepping down and they don't see any ready replacements available, they got to beat the bushes and find somebody. Now, that's not necessarily the best way. Or, worst comes to worst,
Well,
nobody...
We're back to my original, why do we have to find somebody? Why are not people standing up and saying, this has to be changed? I think this school, this city, this town, this sanitary district should be run better. So either they're running well enough that nobody's upset about it.
Some people would claim that, including all the incumbents.
Well,
but you're right.
But they're not doing anything,
It's
right?
better-
The whole point is we don't have an involved public.
It's better for the elected body if there are challengers. It's better for the candidates if they are challenged. And it's better for the voting public if there is challengers. But sometimes there isn't. And then you just, the incumbents, pat themselves on the back and say, I must be doing such a great job, nobody challenged me. But the truth is we all suffer if there are not challengers. Now, usually it's pretty rare still that there are not challengers. I would say 10, 20, 30% of the time there are no challengers. And that's always been true. So I'm not sure that number is increasing. And they don't get free rides time after time after time, unless it's a sanitary district. Sometimes those people get free rides for decades on end. But usually there's occasional free rides, meaning no challengers, but most of the time there's a challenge. That's true of the big school districts too. Small ones get a lot of free rides. But anyway, I agree with your basic point. We have a problem if there are fewer and fewer people interested enough in our local public bodies that they would consider running for public office. But I bet you'd agree with the problem. Life is so crazy, life is so busy, people are short on money, people are short on time. If they're raising families, even retired people, they just think, no, I'm too busy. Who wants to go to a meeting, a public meeting, twice a month?
And here's one other thing. There are people, I know people, you know people that have thought about running, and they're, oh my God, the way you're crucified when you run for an office. I don't want to go through that. So, but this is not new to politics. This has been going on since, 1781, I think.
I agree with you 100%. But do you think that people are becoming less and less likely to run because they are less and less willing to put up with that kind of attacks?
Well, it used to be you were attacked in a newspaper or on TV and there were only a few stations. Now you're attacked blindsided. It's coming from all directions you never see. It's online. And the fact that we now have the internet, that anybody can say anything about anybody, you don't have to even be qualified to say it. You can make the most slanderous, outlandish statement. Greg, you're a blank, and fill in the blank, and all of a sudden it's out there for everybody to see, and you have no defense.
For example, one of the best social network media these days probably is Nextdoor. They're supposed to be non-political, but from my understanding, most of them are very political. A lot of their conversation revolves around, oh, this candidate's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And do you have any control over that as the candidate? No. Does your campaign have any control over it? No. There's all these things going on in Nextdoor, and I'm sure many others, Facebook, and who knows about Instagram and Pinterest.
Well, those are more of Nextdoor. They're just broader. Nextdoor is at least kind of limited to what your little geographic area is.
Yeah. But the point is a very good one. If people are becoming increasingly fearful, perhaps, of losing their privacy and being exposed to... I mean, I never found that a problem. I was the only one I knew that would put out my cell phone number on all my mailers and mail them, several times every election to the voters of San Rafael.
But Greg, you are serious about doing what you're doing. You were never afraid of it.
And I only got a few calls.
But the difference is you weren't afraid of it.
Right.
I do the same thing. What are you going to do to me? I'm old. You're not going to get me fired. I don't have a job.
But many people are fearful. You have a good point.
But you see, how do we help people? And it's important that we do this, whichever side you're on, because it's better that we have a discussion of our different views than only your view or my view. And that's what happens when only incumbents are there.
I agree.
I have a question. There aren't very many people running for offices. They still have until Friday to file.
Yes, but it's getting so late that it's becoming less and less likely that new candidates will come out. If they're coming out this late in the woodwork, maybe they've just thought about it, somebody twisted their arm.
Yeah.
They have to get 20 signatures for city councils. They have to come up with $500, $600, which is not a problem for most people if they're serious and they can have a campaign behind them. But most people don't realize what it takes. If you're saying, Jack, and I probably agree with you, that maybe we as a society ought to do more to help prepare and encourage people to run for public office. The only thing I can see going on right now in the last decade or two that even comes close to that, it's not near enough, is there are some groups like the Marin Women's Political Action Committee, which obviously has a liberal bent, and some other groups like that, put on a candidates training and orientation session. Come to some dinner or lunch or something and pay 30, 40, 50 bucks and we'll have 4 or 5 experts speak about how to do campaigns. Because a lot of these people that come out of the woodwork to run at the last minute or thinking about running for the future, they know nothing and they need a lot of information.
Greg, we're doing that. I'm trying to encourage people and sit down and talk to them. And I've been to a few campaign training sessions, been in a campaign. There's an acronym. You know this acronym, whether you know the words or not. MOM. Message, organization, and the last one, the most important one, money. Now,
Always.
if you don't have money, no matter how big an organization or message you have, it doesn't count. So now how do we get money? You have to go around. I sent you that essay, Beggar in a Blue Blazer.
That's right. I think I remember that. But
And who raises the money? It's up to the candidate to go around.
I agree.
Knocking on
but
doors.
I don't want you to suffer, and I doubt you do because you're extremely sophisticated and you wouldn't fall for this, although I bet most people think this is true. Well, I don't know anybody with money and I can't raise it from my friends, but if I just go out there and give my message, it will resonate with people and people will give me money. No. 90% of any candidate's money comes from their friends. So if you don't have a lot of friends willing to give you money, you're probably not going to succeed in raising enough money from a bunch of strangers.
Well, therein lies one of the big barriers. I've talked to people and said, yeah, I want to run for that. That's great. I sit down within 5 minutes. I can tell. Are you going to go knock on the doors to your friends and neighbors and tell them who you are and what you're doing and ask for money? Now, for years, that just bothered me. And I remember I was walking down
It bothered you that many candidates were not willing to do that?
No. Myself, I didn't want to do that. It was begging. It was
you're not alone.
It was hard for me.
But you're right, it makes it a lot harder for candidates to succeed without that money.
Yeah, well, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And I remember I was walking down Chestnut Street at Scott, and some guy running for, I can't remember who it was, I can't remember his name, I thought I did, was, please vote for me. And I thought, oh man, I couldn't do that. But I couldn't knock on doors asking for real estate listings either. But I made my living making cold calls. It's just something you have to do. Now, there should be training for people to do that, but there's this internal thing that we have. Am I going to lose my privacy? What are people going to think of me? That has to be overcome. You don't have it. I've gotten over it, but most people don't.
I agree with you. I think that
until they're fired up, until they have a reason to run.
Every campaign consultant or even informal advisor that's a little more experienced in politics, talking to every potential candidate will say, make a list of everybody you know, name, address, phone number, email address. And some of us are still old-fashioned low-tech, and this may still be the most standard way to do it, is old-fashioned snail mail. Send them out. Hopefully there's 100 or 200 or 300 or 400, 500, 600 of them. And then here's where people fall down, even if you do that, and most do. Do you follow up with emails? Do you follow up with phone calls? Do you follow up with individual meetings? Do you invite them to local events, free events, coffees? Do you invite them to fundraisers? Sometimes it takes 5 or 6 or 7 attempts to reach them before they finally come to an event or endorse you. But meanwhile, you're giving the message of why you're the best candidate and why they should support you, whether they know you well or not.
And the important thing is you have to have a message to give people. Something that resonates either with you, your passion, this is why I am doing this. Your passion comes through. People buy your passion. And it does take a long time before they even show up at a coffee.
I'd love to talk about this stuff forever, but let's switch to our third and final topic, which we thought we'd spend most of the time talking about, and there's only 10 minutes or so left, 15. Is there a presidential race coming up? I keep mentioning that. Yes, there's a presidential race coming up that is obsessing everybody, including you and I, I'm sure, although we also pay attention to other political races besides the presidency.
Yes.
I've been writing an article every 2 months for a couple of years now for the Marin Bar Association on local politics, state politics, and the presidential race. And the last 6 articles in the last year and a half have been about the same 5 candidates. It's a Democratic challenge. Now it's down to really 3. Only 3 have a chance, really, of getting the nomination. And it's been fascinating. Biden, Bernie, and Elizabeth. I mean, they're the only ones ranking 15 or 20 or 25% in the polls in all the early states and throughout the country and most of the states. Everybody else has fallen down from 15 to 10 to 5 to 4 to 3. They're
well,
almost
I understand Buttigieg is climbing and Elizabeth is dropping.
No, well, Elizabeth was rising until recently. Buttigieg, I don't want to rule out completely. He is doing well in Iowa. It might be a flash in the pan, and he comes back down to earth, as Kamala did and just dropped out the other day. He has a chance of getting some delegates in Iowa. I'm not sure about New Hampshire, maybe, and maybe some others. But to do well, you have to do well in most or all of those 4 states. I don't see Buttigieg doing that. I see the other 3 doing it. So it's going to be one of those 3, and I don't know who. I think Biden is a fragile front runner that may make one too many gaffes, that is seen as too old, even though he's a year younger than Bernie, and he's the same age as Bloomberg, and he looks pretty good and sounds pretty good. I heard one description that say that, in the debates, his answers range from perfectly adequate to very, very good 80% of the time. But that's not good enough because everybody else says things that range from perfectly adequate to very, very good 90 to 95% of the time. So he is not...
You know what Bernie has, Joe has that neither one of them have? He's likable. I like him. I wouldn't vote for him for dog catcher, but he's a likable guy. And that overcomes an awful lot of things. Why is he still where he is in the polls after all the things that have happened?
And he's run 3 times and never got any traction because he was Obama's vice president, and Obama's still very popular. So everybody, oh yeah, good old Uncle Joe, trusty Uncle Joe, he's Obama's partner.
In spite of the fact that Obama's specifically not giving him any help at all. In fact, what was the name of the...
I don't think people realize that, but that's true.
But they're not paying attention, and that brings it back to what I was talking about earlier. Are people really paying attention? Joe's a likable guy, even when he makes a gaffe. Even when he stood up there and talked about corn pop and a chain and all this. I mean, it was a silly story.
I agree. They should be irrelevant, and they're holding them to a high standard because Democrats feel that Trump makes 10 major gaffes a day. So what if Biden makes 1 a month, you know?
But they're not. And the people that like him, like him.
Actually, I've heard the contrary view, which is that although people like Biden and they admire him, they don't get excited about him. And that's maybe his biggest failing.
After all these things, he's still up there, right up there in the polls.
I still think he's fragile and may fall further. I could be wrong. He might be like Trump 4 years ago, which is that, you know, he started out with 10% of the vote, but it was more than the others in single digits. Then he pretty soon had 20% of the vote, which was still above everybody else, even though they were rising too. Then pretty soon he had 30% of the vote, and that was still more than everybody else. So he was basically a front runner from wire to wire, and got it because he remained the front runner. Everybody eventually got on his bandwagon. The same thing could happen to Biden. He may not have a huge percentage of supporters in the early going, but it's higher than everybody else.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I think we have to wait until after the first couple of primaries. First, Iowa. What's going to happen in Iowa?
I do not know, but my guess is...
And I heard that if you don't win in Iowa, you don't win.
Well,
Iowa and
there are exceptions to that, but my guess
I heard there was no exception.
Is that Kerry had 4% and Howard Dean had 25%, and Kerry went on to win the nomination. That was a fluke that he was so low in Iowa. Usually you have to do really well in 2 or 3 of the top 4 states, if not all 4 of them. And my feeling is that the top 3, Joe Biden, and in no particular order that I can guess, Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are all close enough that they're all going to get 20%, 25% in all the early states, so they'll all get a third of the delegates, and nobody else will get any, with the possible exception of Buttigieg in Iowa and maybe New Hampshire. So they're going to be splitting up those votes, and they're all going to have about the same. So even after the top 4 states, and maybe even after Super Tuesday, including California and other big states like Texas, they may all be clustered together closely enough that there's no clear frontrunner. Nearly always there's a clear frontrunner early on after a few states. But the last time there was not, and the time before there was not. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton had to go all 50 states, and it was good. Made Barack Obama a better candidate. He had to go through all 50 states. And then 8 years later, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton ran again, and this time it was Bernie Sanders that took her to all 50 states. And once again, it made Hillary a stronger candidate, so it's a good thing. And we may have the same thing happen again with the 3 or at least 2 out of those top 3 candidates going all the way. Unless someone pulls ahead with such a large lead that the other person can't come up with any way to win, and then they drop out and endorse them.
So what do you think they're going to do against Trump? No matter who it is, pick one.
I'm changing my opinion on that. I thought, you know, Trump won by less than 1% in 4 states that was unexpected by everyone, including Trump himself. So he won a fairly hefty electoral vote victory, not a landslide as he claims, but because he won these unexpected states. I thought his approval ratings have got to have gone down by 1% or more in most or all of those states. And I've been surprised to learn recently that maybe they haven't. In Wisconsin, he's still ahead. I was shocked. In Pennsylvania and Michigan, I don't know. It's going to be close in those two. And Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
Who was it that said it's the economy, stupid?
If you're talking about the stock market, yes. Stock market.
Whoa. Do you remember who said it? I'm trying to remember who said it. Was it Clinton?
Clinton.
Yeah, it's the economy, stupid.
That's what helped him beat George Bush
So how's the economy doing?
By some measures, okay. But the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the schism's getting harder, the frustration's growing.
God,
I don't mean to foment class warfare or soaking the rich.
You are.
But don't you think
how many people are working now that were not working before? The unemployment is the lowest it's been in 60 years. And you can't.
But they're falling further and further behind.
Who's falling further and further behind of what?
That are a bigger and bigger chunk of the society. When 1% of the people has half the wealth and 99% of the people has the other half, don't you think that foments revolution? I don't want revolution. You don't want revolution. Most thinking people don't want revolution. Don't you think it's inevitable if the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer?
I think you're overblowing it.
I hope so.
Significantly.
But
you know,
that's why Elizabeth and Bernie are saying, wealth tax, brand new. Hasn't worked in other states, in other countries,
Now you're
perhaps.
going after the landlord, saying, this guy can't afford to live in your place, you can't raise your rent so he can still live there. That's what that is.
No, I'm just saying, if you're worth more than $50 million, we're going to charge you 2 cents on the dollar, all
well,
wealth
that's
over that.
outrageous. I mean, the guy that's worth $50 million or $5 billion, he made that money. You know, unlike your buddy Obama said, you didn't build that. I built a company, you didn't build that. Well, he didn't build it. Here's a guy that came into this with no money at all, and he's buying a $15 million house in...
Who are you talking about?
Obama. A $15 million house in Martha's Vineyard next to the shore. Doesn't he know that the sea is going to flood, that in 10 years, this, you know, we're all going to die?
It's not
the point is you're going after people that have earned their money. Is there a disparity in wealth? Yeah, there's always been a disparity in wealth. The number looks bigger. 1% of the people own about 80% of the assets.
I forget the exact numbers. But
Well, that's about what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is something in economics called the 80-20 rule. You've heard that?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
And that seems to fit through just about anything. And it's been that way since Pareto discovered it in the 1920s in Italy. He was an Italian economist. And it's still the truth.
But what if it gets to be 90-10? You don't think that'll be too big a strain on society and raise the likelihood of violent revolution too high?
No, the only
and we have
time
to
it's
take
going to
radical
be
revolution?
the only time it's going to be a violent revolution is if I'm not eating. Everybody's working. You know, one of the most important things in any economy, Greg, is the velocity of money that's moving through the economy. All these people that are working, maybe they're not making $1 million a year, but they're making money. They're buying food, they're going to movies, they're buying trinkets, they're spending money.
But their standard of living is much lower than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. You don't
not-
believe that?
No, I don't believe that. Not at all.
Even though the
people
a lot
that
of
are
signs show the
employed-
economy is doing well, but
No.
not for a lot of these people. A
Oh,
huge
hey,
chunk.
Not for a lot of people. Yeah.
Huge chunk.
There's what?
And growing. I think a larger and larger
No,
chunk of
Greg,
society, 20, 30,
no.
40%, are not
People
doing as well
that
as
are-
they were a decade or 2 or 3 ago. So they're
That's
getting
not
worse.
really true.
Well, it depends how you measure it. But and the rich are getting richer. You don't deny that.
You know, gentlemen, we only
some
have a
rich are
few more
getting
minutes,
richer.
and I was going to say that perhaps you each want to take a couple of minutes and
I'll tell you what's
compress
getting
your
bigger is the
opinions,
government.
and we can.
And the government is run by bureaucracies. The biggest thing that is going on right now is the deep state, and that's why the Democrats want to get rid of Trump. He said he was going to clean the swamp. Now, what is the swamp?
He's made it swampier.
No, don't say that, Greg. You know that's
let him
not true.
Deep
take it
state
through
sounds
this
like a
couple of minutes.
conspiracy
It
theory
is
to
not
me.
a conspiracy
What
theory.
evidence do you have?
What evidence do
Yes.
I have? Well, it started with a guy named Franklin Roosevelt, who created the alphabet agencies. My favorite one is the EPA. It started out...
Actually, Richard Nixon founded that.
No, he didn't found it. He signed it, but he didn't found it. He signed it into law. And it was recent. We just had a fire in Cayuga County in upper New York. Okay, that was an emergency. We shouldn't have our rivers on fire. So we start watching this. But it has grown so big, such a huge bureaucracy, and your buddy Obama comes in and says, we're going to have the Inland Waters Act, and we're going to make that a rule. And he gave power to the EPA and to the Army Corps of Engineers to go out and shut down property with a vernal pond on it. You know what that is?
Yes.
All of a sudden, you've got to fight the bureaucracy.
I think...
Now, the problem that we have with that, that's the deep state, because these are agencies that are, they write regulations that have the full force and effect of law. But you and I as a citizen did not elect these people. And we now have to fight our own government to get a redress of wrongs. That is what we're dealing with. There were two people that said this regarding the State Department. Good for the deep state. The president can't make these, I don't care what president
I agree
is,
with
the
you that
president runs these.
Obama expanded government. So did Clinton. Democrats tend to do that. They try to level the playing field.
Whoa, level the playing field. They're creating a place where power exists in the government.
But that doesn't support a deep state theory.
It's not a theory.
It's a
We only
conspiracy.
have
a
about
fact.
1 minute, gentlemen. So you're
I was just going to say that Democrats tend to want to level the playing field. You call that taking from the rich and giving to the poor, I'm sure, in some form, in some words. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Those will do.
But and there's times when that's inappropriate, but there are times when it's appropriate. When people are getting squeezed so hard that it's unfair, that it's inhumane, maybe we ought to help those people out a little bit, especially when some people are getting so much richer, so much faster every year, that maybe they ought to help out a little bit more. And I have to respond to what your statement that, you didn't build that, well, what he meant was, you may have earned $50 million. You may have been the CEO of a large corporation which you founded single-handedly. Congratulations, good work. You didn't do it alone. You did it with the help and infrastructure of a society which we as a society created. Shouldn't you share in that $50 million wealth back with the society that helped you create it?
They paid taxes.
That was the only thing he meant by you didn't do it alone.
That isn't.
Yes, that is exactly what he meant.
That's your interpretation of it.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you, and we'll have you back again very soon so we can continue the discussion.
We're out of time?
Thank you, Jack Wilkinson and Greg Brockbank. And this is Shirley Graves.
Thank you, Shirley.
We'll say good evening.